Hello, hello everybody. My name is Ștefan Pălărie. I'm a senator in the Educational Committee of the Senate chamber of the Parliament. We are having the honor to host a rather technical conversation, but also in a few moments probably a philosophical dialogue, a philosophical discussion about the future, the past, the present, and the future of education. And I'm really honored to have a great guest with us. Lucian, I will kindly ask you to change the name with Mr. Van der Loo, or we leave it like this, but we kind of explain. Just a second, we forgot to change the name of the guest. As I said, when we invited several parliamentary representatives from all the parties in the Educational Committee to join, we said that we would be glad to have with us I would say an expert in the field of education, and not only. We have with us Mr. Hans van der Loo, who is Dutch, but had a very prolific working experience for the Shell company, for McKinsey, and World Business Council for Sustainability. And on top of that, Mr. Hans van der Loo is in Romania for the Climate Change Summit. And he was really generous to share some of his time for this discussion. I will just let him to introduce shortly, and then I will follow up with a brief description of what is happening right now in Romania from the technical point of view of education. So then we can have afterwards an introduction on how global trends and probably specific trends of what's happening in Romania together should be considered when we think about educational reform for a country. I will mute my microphone and invite Mr. Hans van der Loo to take the floor.
Muted yet? Yeah. I hope you can all see me. I do apologize for not speaking Romanian. Am I coming through now?
Yes.
Good. Thank you, Stefan, very much indeed for your kind hospitality in this splendid environment. I have, of course, this is my first visit to Romania, but this building, of course, is known well outside Romania as well. Indeed, as you said, Stefan, I'm here. I was opening the Climate Change Summit yesterday in your beautiful Odeon Theatre. And that actually is quite strongly related with the portfolio that you are managing, namely the education portfolio, because we look at people also as resources, not like material resources, but talent resources that we need to use for the well-being of society, and therefore it has to be commensurate and matching the challenges. And well, I spoke about that later. This is just a brief introduction, and Stefan, but I think we all know, particularly you here in Romania, with a borderline to the Ukraine, that the world is pretty much on fire. And the war, of course, has its own reasons, but there were other trends already developing independent of the war on energy and natural resources and climate change. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. I did that yesterday as well for half an hour of the opening, and I'll be happy to share that and what implications that has for how we deal with our current talent to make sure that best serves the well-being of Romanians in order to help to reach the other end of the century in a civilized and peaceful way, not just getting there, but getting there in a civilized and peaceful way. And thank you for receiving me.
Thank you as well. Thank you a lot. Well, before entering the educational system, I know that you're an expert in education at global level. We just need to give a bit of a context for Romania right now. On one hand, it's quite funny because just before meeting you on my mobile phone, I was listening from the speeches where different political representatives from the European Parliament of Romania were addressing to the plenary in the towards the encouragement of all the countries in European Union to accept the entry of Romania and Bulgaria in Schengen space. Yeah? And this is one element. We cannot talk about Romania out of a European framework. With the European framework, I'm pretty sure that you are familiar. Now, coming more specific to the national setup, we are now functioning on a bill on the educational law that was voted and was established in 2011. But afterwards, we had more than probably hundreds of changes and alterations and modifications of this bill, sometimes part of a parliamentary process of legislative debate, but sometimes also part of the government or the Ministry of Education who created an emergency bill changing the legal framework. We also had a very long process of which was run by the president of the country called the Educated Romania as a flagship project. And we were towards a process of having the new bills of education coming out as a proposal from the Ministry of Education. We had them coming out in the public debate before becoming an official proposal. The debate was fierce. We had a lot of people who were like complaining about different aspects of these proposals. And this process in 45 days of debate ended up with more than 10,000 proposals for changes of this law, coming from different social actors, social partners, being students, being teachers, being parents, being syndicate unions of teachers, and so on. And now, exactly when the process was getting towards the clarity and to ending into coming this proposal officially, or version 2.0 of the proposal coming into the parliament, we had a huge scandal on plagiarism from the Ministry of Education. Because of this scandal, the Ministry of Education resigned, and now we have probably for a few days now a new Ministry of Education that will probably need some time to understand what's happening. The person was close to the process, but still, and then most probably in about 1 month, we are going to have this new 2 proposals, let's see, for education, K-12 and separately, university education, academic education. And we will need probably to start a debate, a political debate in the Parliament House. So this is the whole context. Besides that, what I just want to mention a few numbers. Romania is right now, as we all know, Eastern Europe with a huge diaspora, which means like a lot of Romanians living abroad, most probably 1.4 million. There were like some estimations in Italy and about 1 million in Spain. Altogether, officially, some official numbers were counting about 5 to 7 millions of Romanians leaving the country, working abroad, living abroad. We also talk about an approximately 200,000 people deficit in the labor market in Romania, which means that we either increase ways of using labor power that is not used right now in Romania, like either can be, these people with disabilities, it can be young mothers, it can be, maybe prolonging the active life by having the retirement age, leaving it later, or obviously immigration coming, people coming from other countries to cover up this deficit. So education-wise, companies are complaining about the quality of the people who are graduating. Demographic-wise, companies are complaining about having not enough people, and also not, enough skilled people for the new industries, for the new technologies, for the new jobs that were not even created 5 years ago. This comes under the global umbrella. So with this in mind, I'm going to kindly invite you to give us your perspective on things that are happening globally, regionally, and maybe nationally, and what should be considered when thinking about a new law of education, which should shape the future of, in new generations for 10 or 15 or maybe 20 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. What you describe for the situation of Romania is not, of course, exclusively the issue for Romania. Many Western countries are confronted with similar challenges, notably in Europe, the developments in the demographic profile of the country. We now live in an era where we have a lot of change. So much change even that one can say that the young people of today, so the ones that go into your K-12 system, that we're actually preparing them for doing jobs to solve problems we're not yet even aware of. So there's a large degree of uncertainty. And so I always take the example, if I would be willing to help you with what you're going to do next week, then I would ask you, what are you going to do next week? And if you tell me, well, Hans, I'm going to go scuba diving in the Philippines where I lived, then I might give you some equipment to go scuba diving. If on the other hand, you'd say, well, next week I'm going to Switzerland where I currently live, mountain climbing, then I would give you different equipment. But what should I give you if I want to help you, but I do not know what you're going to do next week or next month? And actually, probably, Stefan, you did tell the people you invited to participate in here that I'm the European STEM ambassador. STEM is an abbreviation that stands for science, technology, engineer, and mathematics. And many people, when they listen to me, think, oh yeah, Hans, but you are a typical engineer. I am not an engineer, but I've been working with engineers for 28 years, and then I can't help it, it's rubbing all over you. But the reason why I'm focusing on that particular competence is not because it is more important than languages or sociology or history or law. These are all important, but a chain is just as strong as the weakest link. And the weakest link at this moment in time in virtually all countries in Europe is a shortage of STEM skills. And the reason why we call ourselves the EU STEM Coalition, and I'll say a little bit about that, we are about 55 platforms. Some are regional platforms, some are national platforms, some are pan-European platforms. I actually did check on our website, and I think we do not have any Romanian partners yet. So perhaps out of this conversation and my visit to Romania and the meetings that I'll be having tomorrow, that may change. In actual fact, next week on Thursday, we have the biannual General Assembly of our members. Some will be present physically in Saint Raphael in France, but many more will be present virtually. And the essence of the General Assemblies and the existing of this platform is best practice exchange. Because we work with the premise that, you know, most ideas we think of are actually not original ideas. Somebody will have had a similar idea confronted with the same situation. So, for example, I personally have been helping a team in Brittany, in France, who had a certain problem that they could not overcome. And I said, well, look, we cannot do it here because things are not like they are with you in the Netherlands. I said, but the Netherlands are completely unimportant. Tell me what the problems are. And they said what the problems are. I said, that element sounds very much like a problem they had in Basque country in Spain. And the other one looks very much what they had in Denmark. So we then link them with the people in Basque country and with the people in Denmark. So it's not us like a central that we issue the advice. We actually link up. We are like, if you like, a ledger of best practices, and we can help you come up. Then speak with them, and they are practitioners. So they do not talk about a theoretical solution. They actually will share with you, yes, we had a similar problem, and this is how we did overcome that. So, sorry, Stefan.
Yeah, just if I can intervene, I just wanted to clarify for me one element. And that was whether you are working with supporting companies or NGOs or governments when it comes to this topic of integrating or enhancing the STEM education in the different national systems.
Good question. Sorry for not saying that. Thank you for guiding me there. These platforms are all, like, if you like, more NGO types, or they have different kind of status. We do not have any companies, any corporates, although we do seek help from companies, notably that they liberate people that can go to schools to explain. Because what we basically do is that how do you interest and make young people more enthusiastic for STEM? Well, first of all, you have to explain them why it is valuable for what they want to do. And a very important distinction, and maybe some of the people that are on the call may have heard of the rose study, or like the flower, is the relevance of science education. If you remind me, I can perhaps send you a link later on, Stefan, which was done by a Scandinavian professor with the name of Svein Sjöberg. And he said that in the old days, young people would have an ambition to become a firefighter or a policeman or a doctor. Today, young people formulate their ambitions in a different way. They say, well, I want to work in the area of preservation of nature or in a caring role. And so if you're a caring role, that can be old people, it can be, you know, being a teacher or whatever. So the challenge is to explain why STEM skills help you to fulfill your ambition. We're not going to tell you that you should pick another ambition, but why STEM skills will help you be successful in your ambition. Now, the way one can become a member of the EU STEM Coalition is actually quite simple. You only have to meet 2 criteria. The first criteria is that you actually are willing to support the promotion of STEM skills. And the second criteria is that you have to be an organization with 3 legs. And the 3 legs are, you obviously have to work with schools because it's in schools that education happens. In no country in Europe, you're allowed to do anything in schools unless you got the permission of the Ministry of Education. So the government needs to be involved. And that, of course, is nothing new because governments and schools work together. The new thing is there has to be a 3rd leg. And that 3rd leg is society. And society can either be a company or an NGO or a social organization, because that is where the practice is. Now, it's very interesting, Stefan, that in Europe, there's a bit of a dividing line that, for example, I would say in Northwest Europe, people are more comfortable to actually involve the private sector and to come to schools. But let's say south of Belgium, that is much more of a problem. When I say in France, that in Denmark or in the Netherlands or in the UK, we actually have representatives of business coming to schools to explain what does a manager do, then I say, what? You want to expose our young pupils to a manager? And then 20 minutes later, I asked them, what are your ambitions for your pupils? Oh, well, that they will lead successful lives, you know, that they can have happy families, have fulfilling jobs. I said, well, where then do they have to work? Do they all have to come and teach us? No, they may come and work for Renault or in the government and things like that. But if that's what you want, would it not be useful to talk with somebody at a young age who is doing that? So you understand, that is what they do. And so this is really what we encourage. And it's very simple, Stefan. You're a politician, so you know the importance of trust. So I very often work with mayors of small towns who play football or hockey. And I say, amongst your friends, do you have somebody in your football team who happens to run a cafe or a restaurant or is a manager in a company? And since you play football with him on a Saturday, can we perhaps have a meeting on a Monday or a Tuesday and we talk? Because they already have the trust level because they play. And then you say, well, would it not be a good idea if Arnaud would actually come to the school of Stefan and he would speak in the school? So you will bring together the different incompetencies, and you can do that because the bridge is built by trust. If people do not know each other, then they are very suspicious and say, oh no, we cannot have people of a company coming to a school. And to be quite honest, it is not the case that, you know, in Northwest Europe, it went easy. For example, we started this some 18 years ago in the Netherlands, and there were questions in the Dutch parliament whether Philips and Shell and Unilever were now also going to run education, which of course they do not. And we are very, very careful, Stefan, because one of the professions that has suffered most in status in society is that of a teacher. 30 years ago, if you would go to a village, who were the important people in the village? It was the priest, it was the mayor, it was the doctor, and it was the headmaster. And why was that? Because these 4 groups of people, they were the repository of knowledge. So of course, the doctor still has his knowledge because he studied medicine, so we still respect him or her, but there is less respect for the teacher now. And in a way, there is a good reason, because it means that the knowledge and know-how has been democratized. If you are a teacher, even at a primary school, every child will know more than you about some subject because it's his father's job, or they went on holiday in a country and he saw a museum or they saw a video. And that is a good thing because the total level of knowledge has gone up. And so a teacher, rather than being the container of knowledge that is being dispensed, he's becoming more the facilitator of learning. And I think it's really important that we transform education in a way that it serves citizens better to live lives in the 21st century. Actually, we are now in a very beautiful building. I've got no idea, although I think that Ciprian just told me when it was built, but that's not important because if I need to know that, I've got it in my phone. So our education system is still very much geared towards teaching children to give the right answer. That should change. We should teach them how to ask the right question. And that's a different approach. And I always make a little bit of a language joke, Stefan, with the word STEM. I think we need to teach pupils systemic thinking. And then people say, you mean systematic thinking or systems thinking? No, systemic thinking. What is that? And at one stage, I thought I had invented the word myself, but it was invented elsewhere as well, as I earlier said. To me, systemic thinking means three things. It means critical, logical, and holistic thinking. And the last part is the most difficult, because we are now being educated often as experts in a certain field and do not understand that there may be assumptions or conditions outside our field of expertise that are important. So as I already said, I'm not an engineer, I am an MBA, one of those horrible people, that do run businesses and learn economics.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I intervene in the process, but I want to ask you a very hard question. I'm a big fan of hard questions. And it's a hard question because it's most probably going to make your work irrelevant. Wait for it. I need to tell you a very short story before. Before my politician life, I was also part of the civil society. I was running an educational NGO. We're doing, by the way, I will talk to them to see whether, they are filling all the free criteria that you said. And since you are missing a partner for Romania, maybe they would be interested to join you. I left that organization behind, but we were having a conversation about one day when our organization is going to be no longer needed. I used to work before in a private training company. So we are teaching adults in corporations on, how to build skills that are still missing. Efficiency, time management, teamwork, collaboration, presentation skills, the possibility of, negotiating and coming to mutual agreement. And we were also joking about maybe one day we would be out of business. What if the Romanian educational system would be so good that all the skills that we are now making money on building up in companies would be no longer needed because they are already established and built up in the national education system. So using the same story and coming back to your work, what would make your organization, your platform of STEM, irrelevant? What would make your talks to mayors on Saturdays to bring on Monday, colleagues and trusted people to start lobbying or explaining to them the importance of STEM? How would the national education system would look like so that your work is no longer needed because it is happening already in the system? If you know if you understand my question, please.
That actually is a very good question, Stefan. And actually, in fact, I got a question at the conference about the topic that I was talking about. And people were saying, well, thank you very much for your talk. What a profound new insights. And I said, well, I'm glad that you find profound new insights, but I have only been talking about common sense. But common sense is often not that common. And so they asked, well, what's your objective? And I said, I want to eradicate myself. I want to make myself superfluous because actually, this is what you already said. So it was the climate change summit. So these were a reasonable level of experts, professionals, and even they said, you've given us insights we did not have before. These are not average citizens. So on the one hand, that's very flattering. That's professionals tell me you've given us new insights. It's also worrying because if even experts in the field, if they say this is new to them, then where is the population at large? So yes, my biggest success would be that I am no longer needed or the work that I'm doing is no longer needed. Now, to get back to your question with the mayors, the good thing, and you'll like this as a politician, in order to get a movement or an impact, you do not need 1/2+1. You do not need a majority, an absolute majority. It is actually scientifically established that when you get about 14 to 15% of people moving, that is enough to become alive. It's a little bit like a plant. When you put a little seed in a pot, then if you are able to nourish it through the first stage, then you have a very high probability that it will continue growing. And it's equivalent to that. So if you take the example, what I've done, in the Bourgogne, I did actually bring together, I asked a mayor, well, okay, this is a problem. Let's just have a beer with your friends who are working in private industry. And we did that. And then the next thing what happened is that a year later, this mayor was at a mayor's conference and actually said, you know what you should do? You should go and have a beer with your friends and select those friends that actually work in industry and bring also your friends that are headmasters of the school and bring them together a glass of wine. Because it's an informal setting whereby I build up the trust in you as an individual that we can then talk, and I will be less afraid to actually let you come to school. Now, one more thing that I'd like to share, Stefan, I earlier said, you know, that teachers have had a difficult time, you know, their status came down. Many people, well, a teacher is basically a civil servant, you know, with more holidays, you know, which is not true, but that's the image that is there. So we find it very important to protect the status of the teachers. So what we make sure never happens is that somebody from a company will come into a classroom and say to the children, well, your teacher is not very smart, so I'm here to explain you how it really is. That is absolutely forbidden. So we actually even train them to do two things. We train them how to behave relative to the teacher. So they know they will be introduced by the teacher, and they'll say, well, I've got my friend Stefan here, and he's very skilled at this and this and this. And then you say, oh, thank you, teacher. And then you will start talking. The second thing that we explain, how do you explain things to 15-year-olds? And if we do that, then three things happen. The first thing that happens, the pupils in the class will benefit from practical information why you are successful as a manager because of what you learned at school in mathematics or physics or chemistry or biology. Secondly, because you are very differential and respectful to the teacher, you actually help support the status of the teacher in the eyes of the pupils. And the third thing is that the managers that do that actually enjoy doing it. I'm doing it myself. It is really the kind of questions that 15-year-olds or 16-year-olds or 14-year-olds can ask you are sometimes coming from very different angles, and it's great fun. So actually there's an Indian saying, Stefan, that says it takes a village to raise a child. And I think, you know, the challenge of using our collective talent in the best possible way should not only be the responsibility of the teacher, but parents should help and the village should help. So I think it would be very good, particularly now that in many countries in Europe, and you refer to the skills shortages and workforce shortages, which we have in many countries, ministers of education now have a problem with class size. So they want to reduce the class size. But in many countries, you've got a shortage of teachers. Well, I'm not very good at mathematics, but if I want to halve the size of a class of 30 in two classes of 15, I think I need to double the number of teachers. And so you've got a problem there. So the real solution will become more long-term, but I think the intermediate solution, which we actually promote in many countries, are hybrid teachers. I mean, I've only known you for a couple of minutes, but the way you explain things and your erudite background, I think you would make a great teacher. Now, you may not want to do that full time, but what would be the problem that you would say, half a day, a month, I am a teacher? And that everyone who has some skills or knowledge would do that. In that case, the school would become more open and stand in the middle of society because various people would come and explain what they do. And for example, when you're like 12, 13, 14-year-old, you know, you're still very much materialistically or adventurous or driving. So somebody will come in, and we are particularly keen that we often get female managers in. And she will come, drive there in her Mercedes and say, well, my name is Marian, and I'm the boss of 50 people, about 40 men and 10 women. And then what? She is the boss of 40 men? Huh? The informal information is important. I work for Unilever or whatever, and I have to fly, you know, once a month to London and 2 times a year to New York. Wow, that's the life that I want to have. And then she goes on, but I can only achieve what I've achieved because I use mathematics or physics. So she puts it in a wider context. And that's very important because you should not teach things in isolation. That's also why I said holistic. How are things related one to each other? And it should be presented to pupils like that. Now we got a challenge. What kind of person do you have to be as a teacher to be able to do all that? Well, the answer is you can't. I know that in some countries, the average knowledge, the mathematic knowledge of teachers at secondary schools, except of course for the math teacher, but say of the biology teacher or the French teacher or whatever, is the level of a 14-year-old. Now that is a problem, Stefan, because if, for example, I'm the, say, geography teacher, and I talk about the effects of drought when I've got less water in my rivers. That means that the power plants that use the river for cooling have to reduce the production of electricity because they cannot heat up the water. So in order to be able to explain that, you have to talk about, well, if I got half the water and the cooling capacity, maybe I can increase the heat of the water by 5% more, but it still means I have to bring it up. So you talk about proportions and perspective. Now, children have a very, very sharp antenna. And if they feel that you are nervous about proportions and percentages and perspective like that, and you walk in a big circle around it, so mathematics, that's not a good thing. You better stay far away from that. So what we would want is that people can juggle like a magician. Wow, this is really fantastic. This is inhumane to ask that from one teacher to be able to do everything. And that is why we have to build a supportive alliance around the teacher, both from parents, from professionals in the village, who all come and help and who share the responsibility for the education of their young. So it may sound, well, it's very nice that you said earlier on our conversation can also be a bit philosophical, but this Indian saying of it takes a village to raise a child also applies to OECD countries.
This is amazing for me. Thank you for sharing that, because to be honest, in Romania, one of the biggest, let's say, areas of focus for improving the quality of the teaching, mostly and recently because of the COVID era, was around digital skills, right? So it was about how, I mean, if there is one way into which we can improve our teachers in Romania, that would be teaching them or helping them to learn how to use the digital technology for online learning and online education. But what I'm hearing from you is that, okay, that is a basis, but what it's still missing, or it feels like it's still missing, is that all the teachers, no matter what the field of study they are teaching, they should be familiar, or should be quite, let's say, advanced with mathematics, with proportions, with this critical thinking, with systemic thinking that you mentioned before. Because I don't believe we can get to systemic thinking of the pupils and of the students without having the systemical thinking among the teachers. I think that is impossible. Or maybe you can try to compensate or to avoid that topic by bringing in new people, like career day or career session, and then parents maybe, and other categories of people to come and give more practical teachings rather than the very theoretical ones. And this being said, I'm also like kind of raising a question. Maybe Netherlands is very different from Romania, but I mean, if you take, most probably also in Netherlands, the farthest. Anyhow, Netherlands is an overcrowded territory with a lot of population. But in Romania, it's very easy to have a very far away school into which, if you try to bring anybody from the village for the career day or for the explanation, the quality of that session is going to be probably rather poor. It's going to be agricultural activities related. So I'm asking, should this be rather a process into which to build it up among all the teachers? Should be kind of through a law to say, guys, teachers is good, but we also need continuously some other kind of activities always in schools on top, or very, complementary to what the teachers are doing, if we want to consider a successful K-12, educational one. So I'm wondering now. You made me ask myself a lot of questions.
I think it's actually affirmative to all the aspects. Yes, if the teachers are themselves better equipped in systemic thinking, they can become better facilitators of learning. I think the most important skill, Stefan, that we should leave K-12 system leavers is the ability to know how to learn. So we need to teach them how to learn. You have to learn how to learn, because when you'll be in a new situation, how do you develop the ability to distinguish what's important, what's cause, what's effect, how does it relate, what are the framework conditions? So it's a kind of a meta ability to facilitate learning. Now, yes, you're right, the Netherlands is an incredibly dense country, but there's another country that is perhaps more similar to Romania as far as low density is concerned, at least outside the big cities, and that is Norway. And do note down, I think you're taking notes, so remind me if I do not come back later on. There is an organization there, it's called Newton Room, Newton after Isaac Newton. And because Norway, around the big cities, well, it's like Bucharest, but if you're in the rural areas, then it is, of course, more difficult to have a dedicated STEM room, where children can do experiments and things like that, and, big screens. So what they have developed are mobile rooms, mobile STEM classrooms, and they come in 3 formats. Well, the mobile ones, that's one format. So they actually have a package whereby schools can take a room in their school and make that a very high-tech room where pupils can do experiments. Now, you may not need that room, that classroom, every day of the week. So what they do, they look for a central location, and on Monday, that school can use its own room. But on Tuesday, that room is actually used by a school in the next village, or even 2 villages further down. So on Tuesday, there will be a bus that brings the pupil from that school to this school to use that room. So that is one way of doing it. And even the most extreme form that they have, and I will send you a little film clip about it, are actually literally mobile classrooms that come on a container. In actual fact, it's a long trailer with 2 containers. Each container falls out the sides, so it becomes 3 containers. And then they've got 2 of them, and they've got a space of 6 containers. In one container is a little bit of an auditorium, a very big screen, and what they teach children there is flight simulation. Now, probably you drive a car like I do. Well, driving a car is 2-dimensional, because we're in a flat, so you either go left, right, forward, or backward. With flying, you go up and down as well. And you do have the additional problems that if you go up too steep, you slide down in the same sideways. All children, also the girls, they like it to play with a flight simulator because you have a very complex dashboard. You have many meters. You've got your speed, your angles, etc., etc. So you need to manipulate many input information in order to keep the plane flying. That is a tremendous way to encourage systemic thinking. In the other container, there will be like what you have in the biology or chemistry laboratory, where they can do experiments, etc., etc. They are decorated in a very funny way. You'll see that in the video clip, nearly like a circus. So it's actually quite spectacular when these classrooms come to a village, and they would be there, for example, for 4 to 6 weeks. And so the curriculum in those rural areas will be slightly different than normally. Normally you might have, so every Monday you got physics, etc. You would have a whole term with a more high condensed physics or chemistry or biology content because you're using the facility of having that school on site. And that way you share the cost, because some villages, they only have like 25 pupils. Well, how could you build such a high-tech room for 25 people? So it's about a shared resource, and that's organized. So please, I'll try to think of myself. If I don't, you're allowed to say, Hans, you promise that. So both the website and a little film clip that you can see that. Another thing is that in a country, we had a program which is called First the Class. Not first class, but First the Class. This actually was my favorite program, but unfortunately it does not run anymore because we couldn't find enough companies that wanted to sponsor it. And what it entailed was the following. So you would have a university graduate that would be hired by a company, and they would get paid for 5 days a week. But the company would actually agree that that person would only come to the company for 3 days a week. And the other 2 days, 1 day, that person would actually learn pedagogy. And the second day, he would actually stand in front of the class. So first doing the theory and then explain. Now, if you are 23 or 24 years old and you have to teach 16-year-olds, then you do not have what I perhaps have, the gray hair bonus, oh, this gentleman has worked all over in the world, traveled a lot, because you're very close age-wise. So it's quite challenging to do that. Now, the reason why this is such a fantastic program is what makes a good leader, what makes a good manager. That is a person who can both explain things well and enthuse the team. This is what we're going to do. Well, those happen to be the qualities that you have when you are a teacher. So I'm seeing very much like a blending. So hybrid teachers mean that I bring somebody from the private sector into the school as an assistant of the teacher to explain why STEM topics are important. That person does not have to explain formulas. That's what the teacher does, but it gives the context, the oral context, why this is important. And that is where the motivation of the pupils will come from. Yes, I'm going to do that because I also want to go once a month to London and twice a year to New York and drive a Mercedes and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's around the motivational life. But equally, we should expose managers more to the skill of pedagogy. By the way, may I add, and you don't take insult that, even politicians will benefit from more pedagogy, because it's not only to get elected for your office, but also to get things done. Because I work a lot with politicians, more with policymakers and civil servants. And what I like about them, they all want to make impact. Now, making impact is an art. It is the art of nudging. But in order to nudge people to go and do certain things, well, it's partly persuasion skills, but it's also pedagogy. I mean, of course, if I would say, ever make an appointment in Brussels with somebody and say, okay, I'm going to teach you, they won't even receive me. I mean, this is arrogant. But if I say, well, I would like to come and discuss this and this and this issue with you, then I typically would spend maybe up to half the time on explaining the context. And I said, so this is the context now. Let's talk about what you want to achieve. So you want to achieve that. Well, given the context, perhaps we should consider this and this and this in order to achieve that. It's again a form of systemic thinking.
Okay, I will come back again to this, interest into what kind of shape the ideal framework for a K-12 system should have. And I'm literally asking, maybe there is already, you see some good practices in some other countries. I know about this process of having teachers which are going to always, teach geography, and they say, geography is the same geography. Maybe we can talk about the new economical elements, or maybe when we teach, the map of the country, we're going to talk about some cities with a new recent development, but otherwise, in terms of climate, in terms of, shapes of land, the things are pretty much the same. So they don't see any more necessary, the teachers don't see any more like a need to improve the content or to change the content. We're having talks in Romania and probably in Europe as well about transdisciplinary, fields of study, which should be connected, so that again, systemic thinking or holistic thinking, right? But we don't, I mean, unfortunately, rather, okay, maybe probably because of some resources conversation in terms of how well the teachers are paid and how powerful or how strong the organizational culture of the school is towards continuous improvement and continuous, self-shaping, or it's more towards rather, complaining about the new generations, complaining about the difficulty of the job, almost dragging, hating the life, and as you said, probably the loss of status, of personal status. Now again, the question is should we, put all our money, all our chips and coins on the teachers, and then create from the state system a form of very good continuous training and continuous development of the teachers? Should we consider the teachers element only, necessary but not sufficient for the development of the kids, and then bring in, as you said, maybe insights from other practices or other programs, and then say, no, guys, in terms of the law, you're going to have only 4 days per week, and it cannot be more than that, geography and biology and all the sciences, and 1 day per week should be about life skills, maybe city skills or village skills, and some in one place it's surviving or being successful in a big city is totally different than surviving and being successful in a village. And then that should be, different kind of elements of teaching. Unfortunately, the problem many places is, as you know, education has a very long loop of feedback. You do something or you experiment something now, and only maybe 10, 12, 15 years later, you will find out whether it was a good idea or not. This is one problem. The second problem is that, you see some good practices, you'd want to try and scale them, but how should I say? the stranger it is, the newest it is, the teachers are going probably also through the unions to say, no, okay, this is not what education means. This is not what education is. So this is a bad idea. You're going to affect, our jobs, and then in a way that is not practical. And then here it's like, there are some contradictions. And maybe you can share, I don't know, your thoughts, or maybe also like a good practice of a country that successfully overcame all this barrier. Long feedback loop, as I said, you need reform, and you need novelty, and you need a fresh approach, but people are rather conservatory because of the nature of their job. And then thirdly, it's very difficult to find a standard solution for city life and for the rural life. So how could this be addressed in a bill, in a legal framework?
Well, of course, the feedback loops, that is very eminent. I mean, I already talked for about 18 years about the EU STEM talent pipeline. And then people say, well, you never really got lost of your old industry talking about pipelines, but it is a pipeline, Stefan, because it takes 10 years to make out of a 12-year-old girl a 22-year-old engineer. And then you need 10 more years to make out of that girl a 32-year-old policy advisor. That's 20 years. So if you are very short-term oriented and say, well, yeah, I want to have results next year or in 2 years' time, well, that's rather disappointing, because you may measure a little bit, but you really see the effects over time. So this is also a little bit coming out of conviction, because the pipeline, of course, is not measured in kilometers. It is measured in time. As I just said, 10 years, 20 years. But the analogy with a pipeline is very similar, because nothing can come out of a pipeline that is not put in, but not everything that's being put in the pipeline comes out, because you may have a leak. So you have to have input management, throughput management, and output management. And so the input management for the STEM coalition is very much, depends a bit on the country and where you got the choice point in the K-12, but in most countries around the age of 14, 15, you make the choice for your baccalaureate for the last 2 years. So basically, a lot of effort is given to the 12 to 15-year-olds, sorry, 12 to 16-year-olds. Some countries also do already in the top primary education between 8 and 12, because young children, we know that scientifically, they begin to make their first orientation of what they want to do later in life already around the age of 8 to 10. So already there to tell them how interesting it is, to understand how something works is important. Of course, this 15 or 16-year cutoff point is whether you continue, yes or no, with STEM topics for your baccalaureate. Because of course, if you do not, then as an 18-year-old, you will not go and study at university in a technical faculty because you didn't have it there. So that is our sort of cutoff point, to make sure that we got as many people going in there as possible. Whereby, as I said it earlier, our objective is not to get more people becoming engineers. I mean, if that happens, then that is fine. But we would like more people to be exposed for a few more years to systemic thinking. Because I don't know what you're a runner, Stefan. If you do, then that does something to your lungs. You increase the oxygenating capacity of your lungs. If you do weightlifting, then it does something to your muscles. If you do STEM topics, it does something to your brain. And the facility and the ability to think systemically, you can basically use in any walk of life. So that is why we want to promote that, not necessarily for all people to become engineers, but to have systemic thinking facility. Because what you just said, you call this transdisciplinary approach. Well, what problem in real life is not transdisciplinary in nature? Is always, well, the budget problem, so that's a finance problem. Then you got the willingness of people to agree, that's a persuasion problem. Then you got a resource problem, you got a time problem. It's always multiple dimensions. So actually, you're right that the way we used to teach things at school in a very silo way is actually a bit strange. Now, that you want to take time to explain principles is very good. Now, you probably know better than I, because you are in the profession. But there are modes of teaching whereby you let students do projects, and the teacher looks at where they are and lets them battle and grapple with a problem. And it's okay, time out now, just a few principles. And at that moment in time, when the pupils need it, because they really want to finish the thing that they're building, say, oh, wait a sec, now time out, and then they give the principles. This actually is more challenging for the teacher, because he or she needs to be able to intervene on biology, perhaps a bit on mathematics, perhaps a bit on team skills. So you're right that we have to be careful. What do we ask from the teachers? You cannot sort of make a teacher who is used to doing this to do something completely different. I mean, they're also human beings. You know, the problem what you referred to earlier on is that there's a shortage of competences. But the strange thing is that in many European countries, we have high unemployment and yet shortages. So it's not a shortage of people or a shortage of bodies, it's a shortage of competences. So the three ways to go about that, first of all, you can make sure that people have the right competences, or you actually reskill people, or if you actually equip people with systemic thinking, that is a little bit like the ace in playing cards. You can actually fit that with virtually anything, you know, it's like or a joker, you know, because systemic thinking also help you with the facility to learn how to learn. Perhaps one other thing, I was talking with Despre this morning when we walked up here about a new initiative. It's called Learn Levels, and that is actually aimed at reducing the loss of pupils, their interest in notably physics, because often it's, that's very difficult. Well, Stefan, it's not difficult, it is exact. And there's a difference between difficult and exact. So if I ask an erudite person like you, well, Stefan, what was the cause of the First World War? Well, you give a very well assassination in Sarajevo, crown prince from Austrian Empire, you know, et cetera, political circumstance. Well, how do I grade that? Is it a 6.5 or 7 or maybe even an 8 out of 10? It's difficult to grade. If I ask you how much is 5 plus 2, anything you say that's not 7 is wrong. So that's exact. So the problem is that if you learn physics and it's one thing that you do not understand, well, everything you put on top of that is suffering from that early thing that you get. What these two young men, they're both under 35, developed is a digital artificial software. And every individual pupil has to answer questions in a computer program. And at the end of the computer program, I said, okay, Stefan, that was okay, but a few things were not okay. And in order to solve that problem, you have to read page 32 to 39. So it doesn't say, oh, you have to do the whole year again, or you have to stay at home for the summer to do an exam. No, please read page 32 to 39, because there's very high accuracy diagnosis. It knows exactly, you got a little stone in your shoe. It's the left shoe, the inside 2 centimeters behind the big toe. So then you can have an intervention that takes out that little pebble. Now, if you got a stone in your shoe, that hurts. So you cannot walk. So I want to get rid of the shoes. So I take out the shoe. Now I'm I go on. So this actually helps to monitor the progress of the students, and it diagnoses the problem and then gives a very specific remediation. Then it tests whether now the pupil understood, and then it gives the next learn level. Now, the great thing is that, in my view, if a teacher with 30 pupils in the class does the diagnosis right for 20 pupils, I think he's a good teacher. But 10 children will have the wrong diagnosis and we lose them. This program has a success rate, it's over 99%. So it does 3 things. First of all, it retains the enthusiasm of pupils for something that's not difficult, but exact, but important, physics. Secondly, it helps the teacher, because the teacher, of course, wants to give the right diagnosis to every pupil, but well, how can you do that when you got 30 pupils? And thirdly, Stefan, it helps society because we keep pupils longer into STEM topics. Even if they do not become an engineer later on, they will benefit from having studied STEM for more years, which will serve them whatever walk of life they will choose later on. So it's called Lear Levels. Again, I'll send, maybe I should take the note because I've promised you 2 things already that I actually do make sure that I send it to you. You also said, you know, what should we do with teachers? Should we make them say, okay, you teach your topic 4 days a week, and then the 5th day you do that differently? I think I would see that as enrichment, but well, you said it to yourself as well. Some of the teachers, perhaps particularly the older teachers, you know, they're a little bit conservative. Well, I've always done it this way, so I want to keep it doing that way. Probably you have to be practical, but at a school director, you have to work with perhaps some younger teachers who are willing to do that. And then you have to take horses for courses. I can sit here and say, well, Stefan, this is the ideal mold and the ideal model, and it should go now to ideal, but that's not how practice works. I mean, what you do know is where you want to go to, and you know where you are. And the art is to find a way, how do you get from where you are to where you want to go to? And you have to do it with the team that you have. Well, you're not going to fire teachers if there's shortage of teachers. So what you do, you try to help the teachers that need most help as much as you can and build on their strengths. And you work with the younger ones who perhaps do want to do that. And gradually you move that and bank on the fact that if the older, more conservative teachers see the success of the younger ones, that they say, oh, well, perhaps I do want to be part of this success as well. So what you do there is that you actually use some of the younger teachers who do want to do that as lighthouse, as a model that can be followed by others. But also, and again, this is basic human knowledge, how people deal with others, always be respectful. Be respectful for the older teachers because they may know things and have experience that the younger ones do not have. So try to involve them, because if you respect them, then the likelihood that they may be willing to also adopt something from the younger ones or from new pedagogical methodologies is bigger than when you only hammer them on the head.
All right. And I just wanted to ask you, is there any country or any educational system that you, interacted with that made your job easier? Is there any, particular place, and maybe it can be cultural, social culture, or it can be maybe the difference or the set of differences in educational system that you see or you feel it that it's much closer towards your mission, let's say. So in that places it's easier, or maybe the differences between hard places and very easy places is not necessary between different countries. It can be in the same country, but different contexts. And maybe you can elaborate more on that.
Why does it not? I think there's no one-size-fits-all type solution. The reason why I mentioned that example with the mayor is actually because we have to be pragmatic. Yes, there are countries where culturally wise, the schools are a little bit further away from industry, in Germany or Denmark or Scandinavia, they're slightly closer than in Southern Europe, for example. But this is a generic statement because there are exceptions to the rule in every country. And so basically what you try to do, let's find a best practice in that country and then use that example. Look, this is not some stupid Swedish or Dutch idea. This actually happened in the Bourgogne. And if it happens in the Bourgogne, why can it not be happening in the Gironde? Because you're in the same culture. So this is basically, to facilitate that and say, well, this is, this does fit in our culture. So I think it's very much dependent on finding the teachers or the headmasters, that are willing to do that experiment with you. Yeah, but you're right. For example, in France, I think up till nearly 10% of the teachers are nearly full-time involved in trade union work. So they are paid as a teacher, but they don't stand in front of the class. They just defend the statut, as they call it, of the teachers. And then, yeah, it depends a lot on how you deal with them. I can imagine that if you are a teacher and you get like a different curriculum thrown at you every year, you go crazy. You say, well, what is this about? The rivers don't go differently this year for next year. So why do you want to keep changing that? So I think we should be respectful of that as well, that people are not like robots that you can put in a new disk and now you're on this program. So we should be respectful for that. I think what would help, Stefan, and that is perhaps, a role that perhaps the new Minister of Education could play, that they would, sorry, no, my telephone is ringing. I'll switch it off. He would try to depict a desirable future for what do you want to do as the educators of Romania. So that's the ministry, that's the civil service, that's all the teachers, the supporting staff. What is it that we want for Romania? And I actually think that, well, excuse me for saying, but often you see that the Minister of Education is one of the weakest ministers in the cabinet, because it's the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Economic Affairs. They're really of international trades, or infrastructure, they're important. I do not agree with that. And I've actually suggested at some meetings that we should rename the Ministry of Education into the Ministry of Human Resources or the Ministry of the Future. Because in a way, you just asked yourself, you said, well, Hans, the feedback only comes, after a long time, it may be 5 or 10. And I said that it may even be 10 or 20 years, But the impact on the future is very big of a minister of education. So if he or she could say, well, this is what I envisage for us to have. And Stefan, we are going to have difficult times ahead of us. Actually, I also work, you said I'm an expert. Well, everything is relative. I'm also the chairman of a think tank who actually measure and monitor, the framework conditions for humanity, whether it progresses or reverses. And I've discovered how important you are and the educational function is exactly to have that success. So for me, it's not a goal, it is a means to a goal. And we actually forecast what is happening now, the level of energy and resource prices for the end of this decade. So we're getting what we said this will come, it's coming 10 years earlier. And this will not come away. Everything that we are doing now will either get more costly or less available. And that will have a huge impact. And how will people react to that? And how do we cope with that? You as politicians cannot sell anything to the population if the population does not understand it unless you use brute force. So I think if you have, what was it, the well-educated Romanian, which you earlier said that term, if you have a well-educated population, they may still not like what you tell them that needs happening, but I say, okay, I understand. And if then provided you do it yourself as well, not like, well, we the elite, we think you the people should do that, but we don't do it. Well, that's a political thing. You have no platform. But if you then set the example, you do it as well, they may not like it, but they may understand why it is important to do it. And you can own, so it's your own interest to make sure that you have a well-educated population to understand why very unusual measures that will have to be taken in this decade, why they are necessary. And perhaps also encourage people to come up with smart solutions. Well, how can we do that? I often joke, Stefan, the moving van, the moving truck that will move us from the present to the future has arrived. It's waiting outside of the building. And they've delivered us 3 boxes. And we have to put the present in these 3 boxes to move to the future. Box 1 is the do better box. Box 2 is the do less box. And box 3 is do no more box. Now, just like when you travel, and I'm sure you travel a lot, if you fold up your shirts very neat, do better, do less, do no longer, or do not anymore. So if you fold your shirts very well, you can get more shirts in your suitcase than if you just throw them in like that. So energy efficiency is a no-brainer. Of course, that's a do better. So the more we can put of what we do now in the do better box, the less will have to go to the do less and do no longer box. But in the move to the future, those 2 boxes will not remain empty. There will be things that we are doing now that we'll have to do less of, and we will do less of because it will become unaffordable or it's just not there, and that we indeed should not do anymore. I mean, this is my first visit to Romania. I've not been to your coast, but I can imagine Black Sea coast, very, very beautiful. Why would you want to come every 2 years to Thailand to go to the beach there? I think, we should make air travel a lot more expensive. Yes, it becomes something for the elite, that's right, but we have to bring that down. And maybe if we think it's for the elite, we can say, well, in that case, you have to pay for your CO2 emissions and you all get your own budget. And if you want to make that trip and you need more, you have to buy it from somebody who's not doing that. So then the wealthy people who can afford a ticket actually give some of the money to people that are living very frugally. So think in these kind of ways, because physics and chemistry are the ones that have veto. If we, the people, or we, the politicians, want something for our country, and physics and chemistry do not agree, they will not happen. So it's always wise not to promise anything that's physically or chemically not possible, because it will not happen. But if you did promise it, we will find out a moment that what Stefan said does not work. And then we've got a trust problem. But you said that we would get that, and now we're not getting it. And then you're exposed to the risk that somebody else says, I told you, you can't trust them, vote for me and promise golden mountains. So I think it's very important that both the leaders and the followers do have a better understanding of what is systemically possible. So system thinking and a systemic view is very important. I'm trained, Stefan, as an economist. Don't trust economists. If I have a cup of tea and I'm with a pencil on my cup of tea And I connect wires because I want to measure, for example, the electric conductivity of my pencil. I cannot ignore gravity. I cannot ignore the temperature of the tea. I cannot ignore any part of reality. I, as an economist, I can ignore vast parts of the reality, but with consequences. Because if I look through a tunnel, I may be causing problems here, and I will only see them when they get so big that I can see them from my tunnel, but then they're too big to still deal with. That's why holistic thinking is important. So I'm an economist, but I've fallen off my faith.
But yeah, I mean, I was admiring this, to be honest. Even the structural way of talking, structural way of presenting, structured way of building your arguments. I'm also like a graduate of cybernetics and informatics.
Stefan,
yeah, sure.
To come back on what you said about digitization, I know that several of our platforms, they do coding schools, and coding is actually a very good discipline, because coding does not mean that you change reality. It is you observe a process, you look at the starting position, then you look at what is needed to move to the next position, and then you have to describe that in a very precise way, and you have to code it. So the act of coding is actually an act of very deeply understanding and studying and then writing it down. A similar thing is that I've got kids, and they also, when they were at secondary school, they did homework help with other children. And they came home to me and they said, I actually now understand it even better myself. I said, yes, of course you do, because you understood it already, but perhaps you did not know why you understood it, because you understood it subconsciously or implicitly. But by being forced to vocalize and express it to another person to help them, you have to move it from your subconsciousness in your consciousness, and you have to make it from implicit to explicit. So to explain something to others also helps you yourself to understand things better. So I'm very much in favor of digitization in that sense of coding. Digitization, of course, also in feedback that you say, okay, this is enough, or sensors, etc. But the act of coding is a very good discipline to foster systemic thinking.
Well, I feel exactly the same way. So, but when I sometimes feel a pity that I'm not a professional into the field of study. I've been studying informatics and computer science and cybernetics, which basically means modeling. And I'm not doing modeling. I'm not, working on phenomenon and creating models for that. But it does help me a lot in systemic thinking. Exactly what you're saying. Because the time it's running by, I'm just going to ask you to kindly close with with a final remark. Maybe it can be an advice towards politicians, or it can be a general last piece of advice for whoever is going to be listening in the future, also like this recording. Summarizing, or maybe leaving us with a final question, whatever you feel that it would be the right way to close our conversation, for which I really thank you a lot.
Thank you, Stefan, for that. Well, I think that humanity, sorry, this sounds very grand, but I really want to put it in that context, is at a very special moment in time. If the economists that I just spoke about would be right, and the world economy would grow by 2% a year for the next decades, then in the next 30 years, we would consume more energy and resources than in the last 10,000 years. This is not going to happen. The future will be very different from our expectations, because we talk a lot about renewables, which I support, but we make the mistake that we think that renewables can substitute the energy that we have now. Because the energy that we use now, coal, oil, gas, is also solar energy, but it is prehistoric solar energy. That's why it's called fossil. So those are solar stocks. What renewables capture, sun and wind, are solar flows. You know the difference between capital and cash flow. If you have capital, you can even buy this building. If it would be for sale, you just write out so many millions. If you do not have that, you have to go to the bank, you have to show your salary, and maybe you get a loan and then you sign for that. So capital is worth much more than cash flow. Solar stocks are worth much more than solar flows. Yes, the sun and the wind are free, but it needs a lot of metals to capture it, to convert it, to store it, to distribute it, and that will be the weakest links. So what will happen, and actually I'm afraid that we have just entered that, we are now at the eve of the great simplification, and that will start with financial and economic turbulence, and that will be followed by contraction, as economies will recede to a scale that can be supported by solar flows, because the solar stocks are finite. We do not want to continue with them because of the climate change effects. So we will see a restructuring of society to an extent that we've never seen before in such short space of time. So we will need both wise leaders that can think systemically, and those leaders have an interest in investing in their population so that they can understand their arguments. So I think there is no more important time than now to invest in systemic thinking, because it will be that will make the difference in how we reach the other end of the century. We'll reach it, don't worry, there will not be a mass extinction, although if we continue what we do, there will be a lot of destruction, but human beings will still be there in 2100. Whether we're still there in 300 years, that's another question, but let's focus on this century. But it will make the difference between getting there anyway or getting there in a civilized and peaceful way. And I think, you and I'm older than you are, but we are the generation that we don't know what war is. We know how to spell it, but we do not know what it is, although you've got one on your border right now. We are both in positions that we can influence things. And Einstein had very wise words, and he said, those that have the privilege to know have the duty to act. That is why I do what I do. And I'm very grateful for receiving me in this fantastic building, setting it up. I see that some people have been online as we were talking. It's very good that you recorded. I know it's boring to watch a video that has run. What I will do, I will send you a few things that are a little bit more concise and short. And I would like to end, Stefan, with saying thank you to you and also extend an invitation to you. So I will send you the link, or perhaps you've received it already, of the STEM Coalition. It is perhaps even possible to virtually participate. It will be just 2 hours next week on Thursday, I think between 10:30 and 12:30. I'll send you those details that you can see that. I would invite you or your colleagues to look at the website itself to see whether either there are countries which you feel more affinity, because we do have something I do know in Bulgaria and in Hungary. There are platforms there. Maybe you even know people there. It's easy to give them a call because we've got all the names of the platforms and the particular activity that they do. They say, well, that's not interesting, or that one we do. Because, as I said earlier on, most of the brilliant new ideas that we think we have, somebody else already thought the same somewhere else. So why would you reinvent the wheel when the wheel already is somewhere? So thank you very much, Stefan, for your hospitality, for the time, for enabling this. And I wish you and Romanians well.
Thank you so much.
Just the ending statement was so big that I think we really need me, my colleagues, and probably the future viewers of the movie to process it for a bit of a time. Thank you very much for it. I'm going to close the recording. It was a very enlightening conversation, and we will move on. Thank you.